Can we attend, Martin?
Yes, we've arranged it to do. I will moderate from here, so we'll have we've asked for. Brilliant. Let's hope. All right. As I was just saying, we'll have Martin Griffiths, Secretary General, Special Envoy for Yemen, join us shortly to speak about his briefing to the Security Council. And he just, in fact, he is or just has spoken to council members. Also briefing on Yemen, the Emergency Relief Coordinator Mark Lowcock. And in his remarks, Mr. Lowcock warned that experts are increasingly worried that the window to prevent famine in Yemen is closing quickly. To prevent this, he said, Yemen needs a nationwide ceasefire and a political solution. That, he said, would help move the country back from the edge of famine. And as I mentioned, we'll have Mr. Griffiths here. Also this morning, the Security Council also renewed the mandate of Haiti's UN Integrated Office for another year and adopted a presidential statement on Mali. As you will have seen, we issued earlier today a statement from the Secretary General on corruption in the context of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Guterres said the response to the virus is creating new opportunities to exploit weak oversight and inadequate transparency, diverting funds away from people in their hour of greatest need. The Secretary General said we must work together to stop thievery and exploitation by clamping down on illicit financial flows in tax havens, tackling vested interests that benefit from secrecy and corruption, and exercising utmost vigilance on how resources are spent nationally. Together, we must create more robust systems for accountability, transparency, and integrity without delay, he said. And he urged all governments to use the tools provided by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. And the Secretary General Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Parfait Anyanga, is in Khartoum today to engage with Sudanese authorities in advance of next week's Security Council meeting on Resolution 2046, and that's scheduled for Thursday, the 22nd. So far, Mr. Onanga Anyanga has met with the Prime Minister, the Chair of the Sovereign Council, as well as members of other ministers, including the Defense and Foreign Affairs. This evening, he will meet with members of the South Sudanese mediation team, and he will leave Khartoum tomorrow. And talk about South Sudan, 800,000 people there have been affected by flooding since July. The UN Central Emergency Response Fund has allocated $10 million to provide life-saving assistance to 360,000 of the most vulnerable people. These funds are in addition to the $10 million released earlier by the Humanitarian Coordinator through the South Sudan Humanitarian Fund to kickstart the flood response. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that an additional $46 million is required to respond to the immediate needs due to floods through the end of 2020. Even though most people affected by flooding have been reached with food aid, and more than 100,000 people have received support in areas such as health and shelter, much more assistance is needed, with many still displaced. Our colleagues also call for increased investment in disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation to avoid repeat of some of the crisis year after year. And Iftikhar, I think you had asked me about Afghanistan, and the update is that I can tell you is that the situation in the south of the country is that fighting that began on...
This meeting is being recorded.
Well, that's a good thing. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that fighting that began on 11 October between Afghan National Security Forces and non-state armed groups continued, with sporadic clashes reported today near Lashkar city in Helmand province. The highway between western Afghanistan and Kandahar has reportedly been reopened after being blocked due to the presence of improvised explosive devices and some armed clashes. The highway between Kandahar and Lashkar remains closed. The lack of lack of telephone networks continues to impact the information flow. Reports indicate that 3 health facilities have been occupied by parties to the conflict. The UN and our partner organizations are working with local authorities to resolve the situation. According to initial estimates by local authorities, 35,000 people have been displaced in Lashkar Gah city. Yesterday, 4 joint UN and humanitarian assessment teams were deployed to assess and verify needs. Humanitarian organization in the city are ready to cover immediate needs, including water, sanitation, hygiene services, non-food items, tents, foods, and the provision of medical services. And I've been asked about the ongoing protests in Nigeria, and I can tell you that the Secretary General is following the protests in Nigeria, calling for the dissolution of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad and an end to human rights violations allegedly committed by security agencies. The Secretary General stresses the importance of respect for peaceful protest and freedom of assembly and calls on the security forces to exercise maximum restraint in the policing of the demonstrations. The Secretary General welcomes the decision by the government of Nigeria to disband the Special Anti-Robbery Unit and undertake broader police reforms. He expresses the readiness of the United Nations to accompany Nigeria in those efforts. And an update from Namibia, where our colleagues are working to help the government combat the COVID-19 pandemic. The UN team, led by the resident coordinator, Sen Pang, is supporting authorities to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and address its socio-economic impacts. We have secured nearly $2 million to support the health response through procuring medical supplies and boosting treatment capacity. To protect the environment, families who depend on it for a living, we are supporting national response to drought, to keep communal conservancies open, and to combat poaching and deforestation. The UN Development Program launched an e-commerce platform for rural communities impacted by slowdown in eco-tourism. And from the Asia-Pacific region, a new UN report says that comprehensive social protection systems are necessary in the fight against COVID-19, but are lacking in many countries of the region, despite their rapid socioeconomic ascent. Half of the people in the Southeast, in Asia-Pacific region, have no social protection coverage, and the report urges governments to increase their investments to address poverty, improve health systems, among others. And UNICEF today warned that although hand washing as soap is critical in the fight against the virus, millions of people around the world have no ready access to a place to wash their hands. According to the latest estimate, only 3 out of 5 people worldwide have basic hand washing facilities. 40% of the world's population, which is about 3 billion people, do not have a hand washing facility with soap and water at home. UNICEF also pointed out that 43% of schools lack hand basins with water and soap, and that impacts 818 million school-age children. And turning to the Middle East, Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, today noted Israel's advance of nearly 5,000 housing units in the West Bank. He said that settlement construction is illegal under international law and is one of the major obstacles to peace. This significant number and location of advancements is of great concern to all those who remain committed to achieving Israeli-Palestinian peace, he added. Such moves undermine the prospect of achieving a viable two-state solution by systematically eroding the possibility of establishing a contiguous and independent Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel. Mr. Mladenov called on the authorities to cease immediately all settlement-related activities. And just to remind you that yesterday we issued a statement from the Secretary General welcoming the launch of discussions on the delineation of the Lebanon-Israel maritime boundary following the framework agreement announced on October 1st of this year. And yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General Special Representative for Colombia, Carlos Ruiz-Massieu, briefed members of the Security Council. He said that after almost 4 years after the conclusion of the negotiations that led to the final peace agreement, there's been a historic and undeniable achievement along the way, but enormous challenges remain. He also said there's been an overall reduction in violence since the beginning of the agreement. Some areas in the country continue to suffer from attacks to human rights defenders, former combatants, and entire communities. His full statement was shared with you. Today is the International Day of Rural Women, and this year's theme is Building Rural Women's Resilience in the Wake of COVID-19. In a message for the day, the Secretary General said that rural women played a critical role in agriculture, food security, nutrition, building climate resilience, and managing land and natural resources. However, he said that many suffer from discrimination, systematic racism, structural poverty. The Secretary General called for investment so that rural women can have access to health care, social protection, and agricultural information services they need. Tomorrow, I am delighted to announce that our guest will be David Beasley, who heads the Nobel Prize-winning World Food Program. And then he'll be my guest. We'll start off right at noon with him. Then at 1:30, there'll be a virtual briefing by Fionnuala Lon, the Special Rapporteur on the Promotion of Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms while countering terrorism. Okay. Perfect. Edie.
Thank you very much, Steph. A couple of questions. First, on Yemen, we've heard what Martin Griffiths had to say about the release of detainees. Does the Secretary General have any additional comment on that?
Sorry, say again. Sorry.
On Yemen, we heard what Martin Griffiths had to say.
I think we welcome all these latest developments, which are clearly a positive step. But you'll have a chance to ask Martin as well.
Well, we know what he said. I was asking what the Secretary General.
I understand.
Secondly, I wondered whether the Secretary General had any comments on these ongoing student protests in Thailand and the government's announcement of very strict measures.
Look, it's, in different places around the world, we're seeing demonstrations, and the answer is the same, and it's within the basic principles of the UN, which is that people have a fundamental right to express themselves, to demonstrate peacefully, to speak up. It is incumbent on authorities to allow people to do so, to give them the space to do so, and to use restraint when exercising, to use restraint if they feel there is violence in the demonstrations. I think if you remember a few weeks ago, the Secretary General in a message was very clear that no one should be arrested or go to jail for their political views.
And just a third and final one on Kyrgyzstan. The president resigned, and I wondered whether the Secretary General had any comment on that in relation to the protests that have been going on.
We're obviously following the fast-moving situation in Kyrgyzstan closely. We have taken note of the appointment of Sadir Japarov as Prime Minister yesterday, as well as his assumption of presidential functions earlier today, following the resignation of the president. In light of recent developments, we encourage all relevant Kyrgyzstani actors to ensure that decisions on the way forward for the country are being reached in an inclusive and transparent manner in line with the Kyrgyz constitution and relevant frameworks. I would add that the Special Representative for Central Asia, Natalia Gurnam, had a visit planned to Kyrgyzstan. She arrived in Bishkek not long ago this evening, and tomorrow she will start to engage with relevant actors in support of what is obviously a peaceful solution to the current situation. Mr. Bays and then Evelyn, and then we'll go to the
follow-up on that. She had a meeting planned with the President, which clearly won't go ahead now he's resigned, but she now has a meeting with the Prime Minister?
The situation is fluid. I think she landed. They're working on her agenda. She will effort to meet all the key actors. But obviously some of the people she had planned to meet no longer hold the function.
And a follow-up on one of the things I asked you yesterday, which was about next year's election in Uganda and claims of intimidation against the main opposition candidate, Bobi Wine, in a police raid on his on his campaign office, in which apparently signatures that he needs to take part in the election were stolen or taken.
I think in this goes for any country. It is important that people be able to participate in elections that are organized in a free and fair manner. Let's go. Sorry, let's Evelyn, and then we'll go to the screen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, how are you, Steph?
I can hear you. I can see you.
Yes, I can see you too, for a change, in person. The famous tanker in Yemen, I didn't hear Mr. Griffith's speech mention it. Does the SG have anything to say?
No, there's no. I mean, I didn't have a chance, and that's my bad, to read Mark Lowcock's remarks, see if he mentioned it. But I don't think. I mean, if there was a big update to announce, we would have shared it. We would have shared with you. Right?
Okay, and secondly, is there a reason why there's a rush to housing, Netanyahu's rush to housing in the West Bank? Is it to head off a Biden victory, or is it...
That is a question that is not for me to answer. I speak for one person, that's Secretary General of the United Nations. Toby, and then Abdelhamid.
Thank you, Steph. I'm just wondering, since UN Day is coming up on October 24th, if there's anything special planned, or if you can clue us into what's happening for that occasion.
There is a concert that is being planned, which will take place here. We'll share more information with you on that. And I was going to throw it to my friend Brendan, but he's saying no. We'll have more. We can share more information on that, but it'll be held in a socially distant and safe manner, and we'll be releasing obviously some messages and statements from the Secretary General. Abdelhamid.
Well, thank you, Stéphane. Do you have any update on those children and families left behind after the defeat of ISIL? There were about probably 70,000 of them divided between Syria and Lebanon. Some European countries refused to repatriate those children, deny them nationality. And the UN was trying to convince countries to repatriate the children of their citizens.
I mean, it's a very important, valid question. And I'll admit I do not have an update, but I will try to secure one for you. All right. I don't see any more questions in my chat. I will turn it over to Mr. Varma, and then we will give you a few minutes heads up as soon as Martin is ready, but I understand he's still in the council chamber. For those of you here... sorry.
I have a question.
Iftikhar, sorry. I will unmask myself and I will answer your question.
Thank you, Stéphane, for the information you gave about the situation in Afghanistan's Helmand province. But beyond that, is anything being done to resolve this conflict, to put an end to this fighting? And also, number two, is there any special factor that led the Secretary General to issue a special statement on corruption?
Well, I think, this is something that the Secretary General has spoken about before in a number of the policy briefs, and is something that is of great concern to him. As often in crises, whether locally or internationally, we see criminal elements take advantage of the situation. And this is, I think, if you look at his statement, it's very broad because the problem is very broad and is cutting across the COVID-19 response and is frankly hampering our ability to deal with it with the resources that we need. In terms of Afghanistan, the discussions are ongoing, as you know, between the Taliban and the government. We are being briefed and kept abreast of those discussions. And obviously, it is important that what comes out of it is a peaceful future for the Afghan people, and to make sure that the gains that have been achieved, especially in terms of women and vulnerable groups and children on human rights, are fully respected. Okay. Thank you. For those of you here, we'll give a squawk before Martin comes in. Okay. Thank you.